Now, do black or dark skinned Jews exist? Lately, I've seen a lot of people arguing and debating on this issue. And being an Ethiopian of ancient Jewish ancestry, I thought that it'd be important for me to address it. Based on biblical sacred history and genetic studies, we know that Jewish people have been scattered all throughout the world in history. Jewish people have been living in pretty much all the continents throughout the entire world. It's important, first and foremost, to understand what Jews are. Judaism is not just a religion, it's also an ethnicity. Being Jewish is not just being an adherent of the Jewish religion, Judaism as a whole, or Rabbinic Judaism in particular. Being Jewish is also being a descendant, genetically, of the ancient biblical Jews. The Jewish people are a Semitic people based on the biblical narrative, descendants of Shem. They're also a descendant of Eber, the descendant of Shem, and the term Hebrew comes from Eber. The term Jew comes from the Hebrew term Yehuda. Yehuda or Judah is known as being one of the 12 tribes of Israel, but it's also the term given to the descendants of Jacob from the line of Abraham. Now, the Hebrew people, after having been enslaved in Egypt for 400 years, they were freed from slavery from Egypt by Yahweh, the God of Israel, with the leadership of the prophet Moses. And after establishing a kingdom in what is today Israel, their kingdom was invaded by the Babylonians. And ever since then, the ancient Hebrews have been scattered throughout the world, and even after having migrated back to the Holy Land and having built the second temple, because the first temple that was built during the time of King Solomon had been destroyed by the foreign invading enemies, the second temple was also destroyed shortly after the time of Jesus, and the Jewish people were scattered again and migrated in different directions in the world. Having become stateless, they migrated to the continents of Europe, Asia, Africa, and preserved their communities in the different places that they settled in. Now, in Western culture, the Jewish people who are most famously known are the Ashkenazi Jews, because they're the Jews that lived in Europe. They preserved their culture and their religion, but having lived in European communities for so long, they've over time, over thousands of years, conceivably mixed with the locals. Now, the same thing has happened everywhere in the African continent and the Asian continent and so forth. Now, when it comes to black or dark-skinned Jews, considering that the ancient Jews were descendant of Shem, they're Semitic people, they spoke the Hebrew or Aramaic tongues and had a distinct culture and a particular ethnic phenotype. But then upon having migrated to different parts of the world and having over time, over thousands of years, mixed with the locals respectively to the continents or areas to which they migrated, different groups of Jews over time developed diverse cultural and phenotypic traits. Now, for example, the Jews, the ancient Jews that migrated to the African continent, they went to North Africa to places such as Egypt, Tunisia, Algeria, and Morocco, and the Horn of Africa to places such as Ethiopia, and also into deep Africa. Now, what's important to understand is that being Jewish has two components, an ethnic component and a religious component. But a person can be an ethnic Jew and not adhere to the Jewish religion or to the rabbinic Jewish faith and religious practices. That means that someone can be an ethnic Jew and have a different faith. For example, a person can be an ethnic Jew and be a Christian. A person can be an ethnic Jew and be an atheist. A person can be an ethnic Jew and be practicing any religion. On the other hand, it's also possible for a person to not be an ethnic Jew, to not be a descendant of those ancient Jews genetically, but convert to the Jewish religion and be a religious Jew without being an ethnic Jew. Now, when we come to the question as to whether a person can be black or dark-skinned and Jewish, there are two possibilities there. A person can be black or of African descent without being an ethnic Jew and be a convert to the Jewish religion. But it's also possible for a person to be dark skinned or black and having black traits, but also be a descendant of the ancient ethnic Jews. So a person can be mixed. A person can be of African descent, of black descent on the one hand, but also of Semitic and Jewish descent on the other hand. So a person can be mixed. A good example for that are the Ethiopians. I am one myself. Ethiopians had a Jewish kingdom for 3,000 years that converted to Orthodox Christianity. The emperors of Ethiopia for the past 3,000 years claimed to be direct line descendants of King Solomon, according to tradition. But now there's also scientific genetic evidence that there was gene flow from what is now Israel and Syria 3,000 years ago, consistently with the Ethiopian narrative, into the Ethiopian plateau, from the Levant, from today's Israel, into Ethiopia. For example, I'm an Orthodox Christian by faith, but by ethnicity and genetics, I'm a descendant of ancient Jews who mixed with Ethiopians since the First Temple period, since the time of King Solomon. Habesha people, or Abyssinians, or Ethiopians, are known to be a mixed people, racially and culturally. The Ethiopians are actually peculiar in this sense because we converted to Orthodox Christianity from Judaism as a faith, but also as ethnic Jews who crossed the Red Sea into the Ethiopian plateau from the Middle East, from West Asia, 3,000 years ago and onwards, and started mixing with the locals. Even our Orthodox Christian faith and practice is very Judaic and Hebraic in nature. I actually talk about this in great detail in my book. So to the question, do dark-skinned Jews exist? Absolutely. And I'm one of them ethnically, even though my faith is Orthodox Christian. Actually, we, as Orthodox Christians, don't even consider the Christian religion to be any different than the faith of the ancient Hebrew prophets. There's a disagreement there because Christianity broke off of Judaism. However one may see it, the main point is that a person can be dark-skinned and be ethnically Jewish, just as other Jews could have white skin for having lived in Europe for so many years, for having lived in Europe for thousands of years, whereas the ancient Jews would have had typical Middle Eastern features. It's also true that there are Ethiopians who have Middle Eastern features and Ethiopians who have more African features. But this is also exemplary of the mixture. Dark-skinned ethnic Jews exist. I'm one of them. Actually, my DNA results also attest to that. But whether or not black people or people of African descent in general are Jewish, according to the biblical narrative, black people are descendants of Ham, as far as the biblical story goes.